Okay, so far in the Maimah, we have introduced the first introduction with Yom Tisha Rosh Hashanah. What is the idea of not blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah when it falls on Shabbos? And then we asked the questions of why Rosh Hashanah is on the sixth day of creation. And in order to move forward, we introduced the Midrash that talks about the creation of the world. Because Rosh Hashanah, the creation of the world was on, our question was, the world was created on the 25th of Elul, why are we celebrating Rosh Hashanah on the sixth day of creation, the creation of man? So then we enter into the Medrash, which is the fundamental yesod and foundation of our hemshekh. So we want to know, says the Eibishter wanted to create the world midas hadin. He wanted to create the world in a manner that was in accordance with his attribute of din, of justice, stricture, of severity. And we said, how on earth, how could the Eibishter want to create the world with din? If the Eibishter is a tevat tov lahetiv, if his whole nature is to do good, is to be good and to do good to others, why would he want to start off and create a world that was made with din? And it was only afterwards, when he realized the world couldn't survive, that he involved midas harachamim. So what we said was the Medrash itself brings itself a mashal on this, which was of a king. So you have a king. You're shaking the table. It's not. We're trying to learn. Where is it? You can watch, but you can't interrupt. A king who had cups, and in those cups he had the option. He wanted to put in hot water, then they would break. Cold water, they'd become congealed and dirty. And so he mixed them together and made it into lukewarm water, and they hoped that they would be able to cope. And this was a mashal to understand the original Medrash. So for the purposes of this maimah, the first maimah, the hemshekh, we're going to focus on this aspect of the mashal. Why does the Medrash bring a mashal of a case? What is a case? So a case, initially we said, was a receptacle, something to receive in it liquid. So it was comparable to the idea of malchus. That malchus is a receptacle for all of the 9 spheres that precede it. The malchus on its own doesn't have its own parts of it. Doesn't have its own tzir. It doesn't have its own binyan. You have to create malchus. Malchus is made up of what it receives from the other spheres. Now in malchus we have a range of things that it relates to. It relates to the origin of Neshamas Yisrael. It relates to David HaMelech. It relates to Isha. It relates to so many different things. And we explained how the real focus of this mashal, if we want to hone in on what is most important feature, is that it refers to Knesset Yisrael. So we thought, when you read the Medrash on its own, what do you think? You think it's really referring to Brias Olamis. Who is the Kais? The Kais is the Olam. So in the Rebbe Rashab's explanation is that we're focusing in on Knesset Yisrael, the Makar of Neshamas Yisrael, the level of Malchus, of Atzilus, which is the source of Neshamas Yisrael. And that's where we ended on Amud Gimel. And to explain this, we expanded on two further mashalim. If you think that the mashal of the Medrash itself is a mashal on the Medrash, the Rebbe Rashav himself is now doing something which is comparable to a Medrash. He's bringing further mashalim. So in order to understand his nekuda over here, that the fundamental aspect of the Medrash, what it's focusing on, is on the Neshamas Yisrael, which is going to help explain to us why Rosh Hashanah is on the sixth day of creation when the Neshamas Yisrael were created. He is going to give further mashal. So the first mashal he gives is of an Isha. Then Isha is also the idea of a kos, of a makabel. And we did a very short explanation of how, even though seemingly her whole capacity to reproduce and create children is by virtue of her having sexual relations with her husband, with a chassan. Nevertheless, the true creator of the child is her. She's not just a receptacle or even a conduit. There's not like a baby inside the male reproductive organs. In the semen, there is a small child, which when we learn this more be'iyun, when we go back and learn it more be'iyun, remember, what we're doing at the moment, we're just learning it be'kitzah. We're learning it be'girsa in order to be able to talk about it be'iyun. But there are many shittas, there are many people who thought that there was a baby inside the male semen. And the woman is just an incubator. She just facilitates the growth of the child, which is truly a product of the father. The Rashab says no. Fundamentally, who creates the child? It is the mother. She has the creative power. The specific details of this relationship between the father and the mother in the reproduction of a child is going to be the focus of the second Maimah. There's going to be a slight mention of it at the end of this Maimah, but we're going to go into it much more in detail in the second Maimah. But then on Amud Aled, we brought another mashal, which was the mashal of Dibur, which is the main focus of this Maimah. That in Dibur, that ostensibly it would seem that Dibur is just a mere function of the self to be able to externalize feelings or intellectual consciousness, emotional consciousness, intellectual consciousness, whatever it might be. And the Dibur not only doesn't produce any intellect or emotions, it doesn't even determine how the intellect or emotions is going to be articulated. That itself also originates in intellect. So seemingly it should just be a mere stepping stone, a mere sort of train station for the intellect to move on from, to then communicate to somebody else. But then he explained how we see, in fact, when a person speaks out ideas or feelings, it has a remarkable transformative effect. The person is then somehow able to appreciate the depth of ideas that they weren't able to appreciate when they were contemplating it just in machshava. And similarly, when it comes to emotions, when a person is able to express emotions in speech, in the letters of speech, and the more sort of material and physical and expressive the physical letters that are expressed in the breath and in the throat and in the mouth and articulated, that somehow is ma'or the kavana. It transforms the way a person thinks about an idea or feels about an idea and is transformative. What's going on over here? Ma'at Dibur is seemingly nothing. It's just a container or a conduit. Whatever way you want to understand kois. It could just be just like a container, or it can just be just a conduit. It's a stepping stone towards something else, but it has nothing. All of a sudden, we see that it's transformative. Where does it get this power from? How is it all of a sudden that you speak words, and if you speak them with kavana and with koyach and chayas, all of a sudden you're going to be able to understanding ideas better. You're going to feel things much more deeply. Where's that all coming from? So on Amud Ches, we're going to give the reason. In the first paragraph, we're going to give the reason, and then further on, we're going to give the biur. We're going to give the explanation of the reason. The reason is not understandable. The reason is just a declaration of what the reason is. It's not an explanation of the reason. After it makes the claim what the reason is, and then it's going to explain it. So the reason is as follows: V'hatam b'chol zeh, and the reason for all of this. That through articulating ideas or feelings in speech, a person is able to unravel and reveal far deeper, profound and more profound ideas than was readily available when this idea was originally intended to be expressed and articulated. Was definitely not apparent to the person when they were analyzing the concept purely in their machshava, And more than just the depth of the idea, also in the length and the breadth of the idea. The length, we explained, was the way you can communicate the idea to people of lesser intellect. And the breadth was the way we explained how you can apply it to many other situations and parallel considerations. And furthermore, he says, in the way that the idea is communicated, which is sort of an outcome of, if you expand the idea's length and breadth, you give it many more opportunities to be expressed. Just like we explained above, and it was all, our explanation above was not based on any pasuk or any proof from a Zohar or something like that. The proof was in the pudding. The proof was in that we all experience this, right? When we learn and we're just thinking about it, it's incomparable to when we have to communicate it and we have to teach it to somebody else. Or even if you're just spelling it out to yourself, it's enhanced. How much more so when you're spelling it out to truly a zulas, to truly another person. Not just in intellectual matters, also in emotional considerations. When a person articulates feelings through speech, the excitement and the hisrakshus, the real sense of the depth and the feeling of the idea that you're, or the emotion that you're experiencing at the time is immeasurably enhanced. Okay, so that's what we've said. And what's the reason for this? Hatam b'cholzem, the reason for all of this, and now we're actually going to say it, not just pretend, not like lead you on. Hu mitzad mailas hadibur b'shar shel hamayla. The reason is because speech has a superior origin and source than all the things that it's attempting to articulate. Even than the origin, the source of the intellect. So dibur, and what is dibur? Dibur is the murmuring of sounds in the letters that then formulate words. That capacity that the neshama has. The neshama has a capacity to speak. We have keiches, you have keich ha-seichel, keich ha-midris. Yeah? Just like it's in Perek Motanya. So you have different keiches. You have shalish imish of shebek fulis. You have seichel and you have midris. These are keiches. Another keich is you have the keich to see, you have keich to hear, you have keich to... One of your keiches you have is the keich ha-dibur. You have the ability to speak. You should know that your keich ha-dibur, this human capacity to speak, which other animals don't have, is much more deeply rooted in your nefesh than even your ability to be a sentient human being, to be an intelligent human being, to be an emotional human being. All the complexities of your mind, all the complexities of your heart are inferior in their origin in comparison to your ability to string together sounds to produce words. Okay? That's the claim. Again, it's not the biur. It doesn't make any sense. So obviously, I mean, you could have concluded this yourself. We said there's from observation, it would seem that dibur is inferior to intellect and emotions, because everything you speak about, everything you articulate, whether it be an intellectual idea or an emotional idea, is not from dibur, it's from seichel middas. And it seems like just a functionary tool. But yet we see it's transformative. So you could have concluded yourself that, yeah, there must be something special about dibur. That was obviously where we were going, right? Dibur is something special. So he's claiming what is the conclusion of what he's led you to, what you do to conclude yourself. But it's not a biur yet. Don't say, okay, it's not an answer. It's just an affirmation of the complexity of the situation. How is this so? Doesn't make any sense. What? And then you have to ask yourself, why doesn't it make sense? What were my assumptions beforehand that this is incoherent? What was incoherent before we got to the reason has not become more coherent because it's given the reason. The reason was, obviously, there's something special about Dibur. So you're going to tell me that the Dibur origin. So that solves all the problems. Doesn't solve all the problems. It just sets you up to explain the problem. Yeah? Again, when we learn more Be'iyun, after we finish looking at it, you've got to, you shouldn't be, don't be taken in by the Maimers. All of a sudden, he's giving you a reason, so you have an answer to your questions, you can go to sleep. You can't go to sleep. He hasn't explained anything. He's just stated, it's a statement. So, he first of all talks about how this is Lamaila. Because remember, this is a mashal of Malchus of Atzilus, of Knesset Yisrael, all the things of Kais, the way it is in Malchus of Atzilus. Kais is Malchus of Atzilus. Uki Yadua, like it is well known. The Sheirish Ha'isi is Heim Bechinas HaKesesh Lamaila Me'achachma. So, based on the Kabbalah, the way it's articulated in the Maimarim, the source of the letters of speech in Malchus of Atzilus are rooted in Keser. You say all the time, Keser Malchus, the crown of Malchus. Malchus has this sort of deep inner connection with Keser, which is higher than Chachma. So the function of Malchus, which is the Isis of Dibur, are therefore rooted in Keser, which is higher than Chachma, and that sort of explains why it should be so impactful. But also in Nefesh, Uva Nefesh, who bechinas atmas nefesh lamayla mekecha chachma sheba. So when it comes to the Nefesh, the human being, the letters of speech, the capacity to string together a sentence, is for you a deeper koyach in Nefesh than your ability to conceptualize ideas. Again, we're just stating the order of things, the way things are. We're not explaining how it's the case. And because that is the case, therefore, it now makes sense why it's possible for these letters of speech, when you speak them, it's able to trigger something deep in the self and force a person to understand something better, because it's a higher koyach. The letters of Dibur, these letters of speech, are rooted in somewhere primordial to Seichel. Just like we say, La'olam yilmid makom shli b'chafetz. A person should always learn the place where they want to learn. Chafetz, rotzin. Because rotzin is deeper than chachma. If you want to learn something, then it's going to be megala your koyach ha-seichel, that you're going to be able to understand it better. So if you can trigger your koyach ha-rotzin, then you're going to be able to understand things better. So if osis hadibur are rooted in etzem ha-nefesh, in rotzin and tainug, which is higher than chachma, then by speaking, what you're doing is you're triggering a more primordial source, and then you can express yourself in a more substantive way than otherwise would have been possible. And that's how it works. That's the sort of the structure of speech in relation to the self. And this exceeds that which the intellectual faculties are able to express on their own. And it's revealed through the sort of the demand and the expectation of the letters of Dibur. Letters of Dibur are prompt and force the expression of ideas that in the self you just couldn't, the intellect itself can't just produce. It sort of, it trumps it, it exceeds it. And that's the reason. Okay. But that doesn't explain why it's how it works. Well, we need more of a biur for that. That's just a statement. So as you say, he immediately goes to the next paragraph, ubira inyunu. So we're now going to explain this notion. But this statement in this paragraph is fundamental. And it's fundamental to the whole hemshekh. It's sort of, you'll come back to this. This paragraph is what you're going to come back to again and again as a statement of clarity of how things really are. But because you're going to have the biur, you're going to know you're going to understand it better. The moment you're saying, till now, if you only got this paragraph alone, it doesn't tell you anything. But with Be'ezus Hashem, with all the explanation, this paragraph is going to be what ultimately, at the end of the whole hemshekh, when we eventually get there to the end of the Chol Tichla, it's going to make a summary of the hemshekh. It's really going to go back to the point that it's making over here. This is the key nakuda that it's making over here. Okay, let's go to the biur. And the biur is going to expand it. We're not just going to be talking about dibur vis-a-vis seichel midis. We're going to be talking about the just more bechlolos, the guf, the gabi, the nefesh. This whole relationship of mashpia makabel. We're gonna see, and it's much more in a much more universal sense. And then it's gonna work back to be able to help us explain dibur. It's going to help us explain isha. It's going to help us explain malchus. It's going to help us explain everything. Ubira inyanhu. So the explanation is as follows. There's besides for the remarkable way in which dibur is able to impact seichel midlis, we have a general, a much more universal sort of general similar pattern, which is wondrous, which is surprising. The very fact that oir.
This is a rabbit. Oh, rabbit's nose is falling off.
Okay, let's carry on then.
Mm-hmm.
Can we carry on then? How is it that oir is yored lamata? What is oir? Oir is a reflection of Elokus. Oir is a reflection of the Ma'ir, right? Light is a reflection of the luminary. So why does the luminary become reflected? Kol inyan, it's wondrous. Kol inyan hamshachas ha'oir yuridasi. Why does what is this extension? This exposure? The Ma'ir doesn't need to shine. It's not mukhrach in a gili. The source of light doesn't need to shine. It doesn't need anyone to know that it's full of light. He can keep it to himself. It's an atzmi. So it's an essential thing. It doesn't care what anyone thinks about it. That's the nature of an atzmi. So why is there all this oir? Why is there because for oir is in a sense it's a yerida. We say in Tanya, Yerida me'ir panav yisparich.
Who said it is an atzmi?
Oir is an atzmi. The moir is an atzmi.
So what's one?
Why does the oir?
The moir.
Why is there this assumption that it's normal? Why do we assume it's normal that oiris are nimshach into kelim?
Like in this world, like
at any level. Why is the oir of chachma nimshach into the?
In this world, for example.
Not in this world. Why is the oir of chachma nimshach into the kliya chachma?
As Hashem wanted it to, so it does.
But it's a oir, as we know from the nature of oir, is la'alis l'mayla. The teva of oir is to be nimshach al makeri, right? To be dovak al makeri. You see a flame, it's constantly ascending upwards because it's trying to reach its source in the Yesod HaEish of its origin. That's the nature of light. So why does light go against its nature and be yored? So he explains. Our whole Seder Shtalshalus is confusing, is wondrous, is surprising. Because it's completely opposite of its nature to come and be invested into kalim and into oisius or whatever we're going to call them. The teva ha'oir hu lalis l'mayla v'lidavik v'likol b'makeda. The nature of light is to ascend to its source and to cleave to its source and to be all consumed in its source. Ki yadua, like it's known, the hemshekh is oir gam k'meish hemshekh min ha'ma'ir. That whenever oir,
It's better in this room.
can we not be disturbed, please? Ki yadua the hemshekh is oir gam k'meish hemshekh min ha'ma'ir hu b'chinas gilui halam. Whenever oir is expressed, manifest from the source of light, the luminary, what is it? It's a gilui halam. It's revealing something that was previously concealed. Shu inyan ila va'olu, which we usually term and describe as being a cause and effect. Yeah, gilui halam, cause and effect. These are terms we're going to discuss more in detail when we learn Be'iyun. At the moment, we're just going to leave this as understanding how the expression of anything, the motivation to express something, is something that to something else was unapparent. The very term gilui, oir, expression, revelation, light, is to shed light on the matter. So what was prior to the light being shed? Darkness. It was unapparent. It was dark. It was concealed. Oir is gilui halam. So what the light is revealing is something. What is the source of the light? The source of the light is the Helam. The thing that wasn't revealed is now being revealed. So it's a cause and it's an effect. Yeah, that's their relationship to each other. And it's in the nature of this relationship of ilava alul, a cause and effect, that there is an affinity, there is an attachment of the effect to the cause. There's a certain dvekus. Again, something we're going to talk about in more detail when we learn Be'iyun. And that's a result, and this is in contrast to yesh me'ayin. Again, not wanting to go into too much detail at the moment. Cause and effect is something which is relative to each other. You can't have a cause and effect that are be'ein arech to each other, that are incomparable to each other. They have to be comparable and relative. So the effect is aware and senses its cause. And that is what triggers its desire and its yearning to cleave to its origin, its source, its cause. And not to distance itself and detach itself from it. And that's what it means when the Pasuk says that the Lord your God is an all-consuming flame. That the godliness is associated with fire. Just like the nature of fire is to ascend upwards. The divine light, this kedusha, this alikus, is constantly in a state of aliyah, of ascension. To rise upwards and higher to its origin and to its source, and not to descend downwards. And the truth is, this applies for any spiritual aspect that we ever talk about. It's the nature of spirituality. It's the nature of kedusha. The nature of kedusha is to wish to be included and consumed within its origin. Okay? That's the nature of things. That's the way Oir works. Meaning like Oir, think of it like this. Oir, Gilui, is obsessed with the Ma'ir. What is Oir's identity? What is the identity of an Oir? Identity of a Gilui?
source seeker.
It's just obsessed with the mind. It reflects the mind. It's mekusha, it has a skashus. The oid is dovek in the mind. That's its nature of being. It's upward facing. It's not downward facing. So how does the whole Seder Shtalshlus work? The whole Seder Shtalshlus is that there is Eirin Seif. There's a gilul of Eirin Seif, and it's Nimshach Lamata. There's the Eirin Seif of Chachma, which is Nimshach in the Kliya Chachma and Bina and so forth, and weiter all the way down to Ilam Hazeh. So you have a gilul Eir, and it's Nimshach Lamata. So the question of the Rebbe Rashab is, Yipola. Why is it, if the very nature of the Eir is always to revert back to its origin and to revel in its source, how does it come down Lamata? And we find this true in a person as well. Shanefesh tiva, a person's nefesh, what's the nature of the nefesh? Gam kein la'alis l'mayla, a person has a nefesh. And this nefesh, what does it want to do? It wants to revert back to its source. Like it says in the pasuk, "Rishafeha rish be'ei shall have his yudke." The neshama is described as this fiery flame, a flame of God, so to speak, a divine flame. It's referred to as a shalheves, this sort of torch. It's like a bonfire of sorts that is constantly rising upwards. The way the neshama works is that it's in a state of ha'ala, a state of ascension the whole time. Which is the very opposite of a person's body. The way a body works, it's earthly, it's corporeal, it wishes to stay below. It's affected by the laws of gravity, and it doesn't naturally float upwards. But that's just physically. Also conceptually, it's attached and craves earthly things, and is not by nature yearning for the escape from the earthly realm. Like it says in the pasuk, Ruach ha'adam ha'ili l'mayla, the spirit of man ascends upwards, whereas the spirit of the animal descends below. The ruach, what does it mean by ruach ha'adam, ruach ha'behema? Ruach ha'adam ha'nefesh likis. When we refer to the spirit of man, we're referring to the nefesh likis shaboy that a person has. Shenikra Adam, which we call an Adam, because Adam and the different names that a person can be called, Adam is one of the more superior names, and this is referencing the nefesh likis, and the nefesh likis is in a state of aliyah lamayla, ruach ha'adam ha'ili lamayla, ruach ha'behema. Whereas the spirits of the behema, what is the behema? Shu ha'guf and nefesh ha'bahamis. Hu b'chinas yirida is the opposite. So it's not talking about humans and animals. It's talking about within the human, they have the nefesh likis and they have nefesh ha'bahamis in their guf, and they have opposite aspirations. Nefesh likis aspires to cleave to Elikus from where it came, which we've said earlier is in Knesset Yisrael in Malchus Atzilus, whereas the nefesh ha'bahamis and the guf, desire is to be attached to earthliness and physicality. So just like we were talking about in Klolos Eshtashlus, in Oir generally, also in the human experience, we see this dichotomy, this conflict in the components of the self. So if that's what the nefesh wants to do, why doesn't the nefesh stay lamayla? Why does the nefesh come lamata? Why does the Eir express itself from the Mar? Just go back to the Mar, and there'd be no gilui. Why isn't that the case? Yipola. He started the paragraph. Yipola. It's strange how this happens. Umikol mokim, and we see nevertheless, Harei nefesh yored v'nimshach la'achis haguf. the nefesh does against its nature, not stay lamaila in Knesset Yisrael, in Malchus of Atzilus, and in Mokin Neshamas Yisrael. What does it do? It's Yerid. It comes down, v'nimshech lahachis aguf, and it enlivens the body. But the fact that there's a neshama in a guf is not normal for the neshama. It's the opposite of its nature. And it's being forced to do it. If you would take away the force that is forcing it to do it, it wouldn't be here. There'd be no human beings. There'd be corpses. Right? Ukamaima, like we say in Pirkei Avos, we said in last week's Pirkei Avos, Bal korchach atachai. Against your nature, you live. When it says in Pirkei Avos, Bal korchach atachai, against your nature living, it's saying to the neshama, the nefesh elikis is against your will. You're being forced to be alive. You're being forced to live in a guf. The masha nefesh chai b'seich guf. The fact that you have a nefesh elikis, which you're not just another animal, you're not just a nefesh bahamis in a guf, but you have a nefesh elikis. The fact that this nefesh, shenis bi Yisrael, which is a chelik elakam imal mamash, decides or is forced to enliven your body, to become part of your human experience. The masha nefesh chai b'seich guf hu ba'korchi. It's against the will of the nefesh elikis. Shaloi lefi tivoi or etzena atzmi. It's completely against its natural and essential will and desire, or its essential nature and desire, rather. Better translation. Okay. Umi wa makrichai. Who is forcing this neshama to come into the guf? Mi wa makrichai. How does it happen, Take? If it's completely against its nature, what is forcing it to happen? What forces the neshama to be mislabish in the guf? Zehu aguf. It's the body itself. Since the primordial origin of the guf is superior to the nefesh, is more original than the nefesh, your guf precedes your nefesh. In Lashon HaChakira, there's an ontological primacy to your guf than in your nefesh. Like it's known that the nefesh originates in Memala Kalamim. But the guf originates in Seviv Kalamim. Again, we'll discuss this more in detail when we learn Be'iyun. Everything the Eibishter desired, he made. So the things that are in Asiyah, they originate from the Chofetz Hashem, the desire of Hashem. Rotzein, the Rotzin of Hashem, which is Seviv Kalamim, which is a Keich Makif. Just like Seviv Kalamim is a Keich Makif, Rotzein is a Keich Makif. So when we say Kol Asher Chofetz Havaya, also, the things that are made, are material, they originate in the desire of Hashem, the Rotzin of Hashem. All that, those things that are made, that are physical and material, they originate from the desire and will of Hashem, Sefer Kalam. The Tovkuf Haim Beis will be Yurei, with their Masel Telos Neach, Reish Lamed Zayin. It's because of this deeper origin that the guf has. It's able to compel the nefesh to go against its will, and to descend and become enclosed and to enliven the body, etc. So this is the phenomenal deher that the Maimon is establishing from a very outset. That all of these things that we usually treat as secondary and inferior, such as Isha, such as Dibur, such as Guf, you have to understand they have a Sheirish Kodum. They originate free. And really, the whole world in which we live in, that we think has a standard system of hierarchy. There are higher things, there are lower things, and the higher things somehow express themselves through the lower things, is a false reality. Because in truth, why would a higher thing wish to have anything to do with the lower thing? It would stay higher. It would stay elitist. It's superior. Why would it want to have anything to do with the things that are inferior to it? The fact that we see that everything feels drawn and compelled to these things that are lower. Men are drawn to women. Intellect and emotions are drawn to articulation and speech. Souls are drawn to bodies. Should force you to recognize that the real pulling power is from where? Is from these things, because they're not actually inferior. They are what's creating this whole dynamic. And the greater we can appreciate these seemingly inferior qualities, we can appreciate reality in a whole entirely different way.
If the body is hiding the soul, then why would the body, for the same reason, be elitist and not require the soul?
Good question.
And also, we just...
1 second. Good question. And the Rebbe Hasham's going to ask the question. He's going to deal with that question. Right. We're not just going to say, oh, who needs neshamas? We're not going to be craven and become materialist and just say everything's about materialism. We don't need souls anymore. We're not going to become all feminist and say we don't need men anymore. We're not going to become... We're not going to become all of a sudden like letterists, like Isu, and say we don't need to have sense anymore. We don't have to have everything. We can just pronounce words and be nonsense. It's all about speech. It's not about sense. No, we have a whole different way we're going to explain this. But wait, again, that's why we're learning Megillah, so we can get through a sufficient amount of material that that we can discuss it more in depth. But a good question, and understandably, we're going to deal with that.
Also, what we're going to do with our previous assumption that the reason why the neshama in the guf is about karcha cha'atachai. So the neshama doesn't want to go in the guf. We just said now that he does.
Because it's against it. He wants to, more like he's compelled to, meaning that he's going to explain this. That my nature is to be is to go somewhere else. But there's something so special over here that I feel compelled to go there. It's still against my nature. If you leave me to my own devices, I would go somewhere else.
You're not being forced. Being advised.
If you remember the Mishnah, not only Bar-Koch Atachai, Bar-Koch Atames.
Okay.
So, because it realizes the superiority of the body, and it wants to be in the body, it also doesn't want to leave the body. So it's a conflicting personality. It's like a conflicting desires. You can still have a nature, a natural tendency to want to do one thing, but you are aware that there's something bigger and better than you that's worth exploring, that's worth investing in.
And if we delve a little bit deeper, in a way, for example, the body comes from a higher source than the soul, but the soul, the other stuff it could already be is drawn to, is also what. It doesn't make a difference to say that the body has a very high source.
Why not?
In truth, because if
everything's the same, you're saying.
If the soul really wanted, it could go above to level even higher than the soul.
How?
Just go up and up and up. If it's
no, it hasn't got access to it. It can only go back to its shirish.
And its shirish can go back to its shirish.
No.
Why not?
No, it's mugbal.
So it doesn't really make a difference by now if he goes into the guf.
You're gonna see that the nefesh, by dint of its relationship with the guf, is able to access far deeper, more profound levels of elokus than it can achieve in its own. Through Ma'aseh mitzvahs, which you can only do through the body.
And that's why it's got an affinity to it.
That's why it's compelled to come and enclose itself in the body, because it can have access to a far greater level of kedusha than it's capable of achieving on its own. V'lochein anu royim kishenase eze kilkul chas v'shalom be'eze aver, and therefore we see that when a person has some type of problem, God forbid, with one of his limbs, sha'yidei ze misalik eira nefesh, to the extent that you become paralyzed in that limb. So the eira nefesh, the enlivening force of the nefesh, is not apparent in that limb. Afterwards, if you go through the right medical treatments that will fix the particular problem, then it will become enlivened again. It will be reinvigorated. So this explains that the eira nefesh, the nefesh, the way it is enclosed in the body, is because of the body. This is the main point he's trying to make. That the body is what causes the neshama to come into the guf. And therefore we see practically that when a person has a paralysis in a limb, through fixing that limb, so the meaning of the paralysis is that there's no movement, there's no dynamism in that limb, and so the person, by fixing the limb, can restore the vitality in that limb, and that's so the mode of refuah. What is the method of refuah when you have this paralysis? Is by fixing the limb, because once you do that, then you can be guaranteed to restore the vitality that comes from the nefesh. You don't need to have any alternative sort of process in the refuah to somehow elicit from the nefesh some chayas or vitality to go to that limb. Rather, it happens automatically. And the reason being is it's the limbs of the body which compel and force the nefesh to become enclosed and established in them to give them the vitality. Okay, it's now going to bring up a few in the upcoming brackets. We've got one long bracket here, and then the beginning of the next paragraph is another bracket. Different issues that might contest this theory. So it's just a side point now, which he'll resolve. He wants to bring up. So the first issue that he brings up is the issue of fainting. Now, he's talking about paralysis. He thinks paralysis is a good example that proves the point he's making. But you might come back and say, what about when a person faints? When a person faints, it's seemingly we do try to trigger in the nefesh sort of an awakening to restore the person to consciousness. So the person faints. What's happening? The person is alive. It's like as if they're asleep, right? They've lost consciousness. They lose consciousness. The eira nefesh is no longer operating in the body. The person's not moving. The person doesn't have all of his faculties functioning as they would do if they were awake. That is what happens when someone faints. So he says, "Umasha behis alfus rachmon litzlan oisim pu'ulis lamshech eira nefesh." This that we see when a person faints. What do? We try to get the nefesh to be triggered so that it would restore itself to the body, which seems to be different to the process that we take when a person has a paralysis. For example, you give someone smelling salts, a strong smell, which can enable a person to come round. Yeah. The MS, the reason for this in truth is it's because of the weakness of the body. The reason a person faints is because there's a weakness in the body. The kasha aguf cholush, when the body is weak, is extremely weak, then you have to do all of these different schemes to try and restore the nefesh through like a strong smell, through the smelling salts. If a person has a healthy body, and everything is in order, then the person should be able to restore themselves to consciousness without anything else, without any need for these strong smells. To go to the extent where you need to try these different methods is a result of actually having a weak body. So it doesn't, not only does it not disprove the point, it proves the point. That a healthy body is able to draw the nefesh into it, and when the nefesh is not able to be drawn into the body by the body, it's a sign that the body is weak, because that's what a normal healthy body does. That is the Seder Hadvar. So fainting, not only does it not disprove the point he's making, actually reinforces it. And now he's going to deal with a different medical concern associated with the body, which is a sudden passing of someone. Someone all of a sudden, not through an illness or bad health, all of a sudden the person has, God forbid, a heart attack or stroke or something, they die. What does that say about our circumstances? Doesn't that reflect, the person doesn't have a weak body necessarily. It's not that they have an illness. Sometimes someone doesn't wake up. Strange things happen, and the doctors the person didn't have any problems. It just seems to have happened. So our previous argument that the weak body won't apply. So why all of a sudden do some people just drop dead? The body should be able to draw the neshama. Dying is when the neshama leaves the body. So why are people all of a sudden neshamas leaving their body if their body is forcing it to be inside it? What stops it forcing it to be inside it? Or it seems to rather suggest that it's not the body that's forcing anything if the body is healthy. Yeah? So the inya misa pisay misrachman al-islam. So the notion of when someone, God forbid, drops dead suddenly, it's a result of what? It's a result of there being such a outpouring, such a unveiling and revealing of the soul. It overwhelms the body. So when a person, God forbid, suddenly dies, it's not because the Eira Nefesh is no longer being drawn into the body. What it is there is a healthy equilibrium about how much Nefesh can be drawn into a particular body. And what happens over here is there's been a miscalculation. It's gone too far. There's been too much Gilui Nefesh. And that's because the body has sort of elicited too much from the Nefesh, which has proved to be unhealthy. The body was unable to contain such a degree of nefesh, and the person and it overwhelms the body, and the person dies. Which is comparable to the idea of a death by kissing. So the type of death that talks about Aaron HaKohen and Moshe Rabbeinu. When Moshe Rabbeinu saw the way that Aaron HaKohen passed away, he desired such a death too. And we call that a Mrs. Neshikin. Which is an unbelievable gilui from above. So Hashem reveals such a hashpah to the person that their guf is unable to contain it. And then the nefesh expires and leaves the body and cleaves to its source l'mayla. There's a story in the Zohar of 3 sages who passed away in a similar manner. And sometimes it's not just from an external gilui that comes upon a person, but this could be from the body itself that caused this problem. When a person's body is in a state of excitement, extreme excitement, in a state of rotzi. Rotzi meaning that it's desiring to get out of the limitations and constraints that it exists within in order to connect to Elokus. I don't know why it's in the plural. Hari heim mamshichim eir kazeh. Who's the heim? Okay, so it's like you do in English. They. Hari heim mamshichim eir kazeh. She efshaloi lislabish bekli. That what happens if such a rotzi, such a excitement that the body has, it's rotzi, then the shuv. But the shuv overwhelms it. The response is too extraordinary. It's too much for the body to cope with. Similar to the episode of the death of Aaron's sons, when they came close to Hashem. What does it mean they came close to Hashem? They had a tremendous rotzi, a tremendous yearning and desire to cleave to Hashem. Because they weren't able to contain that, maintain it, there was an extraordinary degree of excitement. Then their souls expired, that kleis nefesh. Like to explain in other places in Chassidus. And it was considered for them to be a sin, even though they had the right intentions. They missed the point. The whole purpose of creation was not for everything to become destroyed, but rather for everything to become civilized and settled. And therefore, amit is bitla kli. If you really want to cleave to Hashem, is why? Because you have bitl. You want to do what Hashem wants. And what does Hashem want? Hashem wants there to be a dir b'tachtenim, to be l'sheves yitzara. So if you have the amit is bitl akli, if the body has the real bittul, the person has the real bittul, when they have their rotzei, they should have within them the constant awareness of what the Eibishter wants, not what they want. And so the person has a rotzei, they wish to cleave to Hashem, not in order to have kleis nefesh, but rather to be able to reach a madrega, that they be able to reveal a greater degree of elokus in the world. But it should be in a manner of shuv. Everything should come down the matter. Like it's explained in another place at length. So we just briefly in this bracket wanted to explain that all these examples, be it paralysis, be it fainting, be it sudden death, be it koleis hanefesh, all of them reinforce the point he's making, that it's the body that is capable of revealing the nefesh in it, and it is what causes it. So all of when things go wrong, it's a reflection of something wrong in that relationship, either a weakness in the body or a strength in the body, in the sense that it's so overwhelmed by its excitement and desire to cleave to Hashem, it overdoes it too much and it misses the point, doesn't have the necessary bittul. The body doesn't have the necessary bittul to realize that Hashem doesn't want everyone to expire in their yearning and desire to cleave to Him, but rather to bring about the sheves yitzara dir b'tachtenim. But in no way does that undermine the central point that he's making, which is what we're focusing on. That the reason why the neshama comes down into the body, which is against its nature, is because of the guf. The guf is what compels it. And because the guf has a deeper shadish and a higher shadish than the neshama, and through the neshama coming into the guf, it's able to be exposed and have access and to benefit from this more profound level of elokus. And so we're now going to ask another question which might contest this point. We have a general klal that in order for there to be hashpah, which means that for something to be granted or gifted, it can't be compelled. It has to be baratzin. The thing itself will not wish to express itself, and there's nothing that's going to be able to make it express itself if it doesn't want to be expressed. It's not like there's... In what sense is we say that the body compels the neshama to do this? Why does the neshama have to listen to the body? It has to be baratzin. And here we're sort of using a language, bal korcha chatachoy, it is against your ratzin. So what does that mean? Not just baratzin, that you want to do it, but you enjoy doing it. So how do we square this? How is it possible that the eira nefesh is forced to be expressed in the guf, by the guf, if it's not what it wants to do? We've just described it, the teva, the nefesh is what? La'alis l'mayla, which is to go back to the source. It's in a tnuah of aliyah, not in a tnuah of yerida. So how all of a sudden does the guf be able to compel it to do this, when we have a general rule, which again we'll talk about more in detail when we learn Be'iyun, this notion that it has to be beratzin and besimcha. Understand the question?
Why should it have to be gafkin?
A yes would be sufficient. Yeah?
What?
A yes would be sufficient.
Yeah.
Good. Question mark. Ha'inyan. So the explanation is as follows. In truth, this is really what the nefesh wants to do. The nefesh is not doing anything it doesn't want to do. It desires and wishes to descend and enliven the body. Because the nefesh is margish, it feels it, it senses it, it's sensitive to the superior state of the guf. How it comes, it's mushush deeper than the nefesh itself, and so it wants to have exposure to that. So it wants to do it. It's not against its will. So 1 second. What we've just said the whole time, it's against its will. It wants la'alis l'mayla. Now we're saying it wants to leirid l'mata. What does it want? But we still call it behechrich. It's against its will. Like the Mishnah says, against your will that you're going to live, that you're going to come and enliven the body. Why is it against its will? Why does it want it? If it never met the guf before, it wasn't aware of the thing of a guf, it would never want this. Its own nature, la'alis l'mayla. That's the way it's programmed, that's the way it's trained, that's the way it feels. Its sense that it wants to come into the guf is because of the guf. The guf has exposed it to something greater and more profound than itself. So it says, okay, I want a bit of that too. But it's behechrich in the sense that it was compelled by its exposure to the body, or its awareness of the body. And so that's sufficient to call it behechrich, bal korchach. Lo mitzad atzmi b'tivoi, it doesn't come from its own nature. That yesh lo yiratzon leided, it doesn't have its own natural desire to be in a tnuah of descending. The b'tivoi yiratzon elalis l'mayla davka, its whole natural self is to ascend. It's just because it's become exposed to the deeper reality which is called the body, then that's what transforms it to additionally have this desire to wish to come and enliven the body. So now we can understand the other part of the Mishnah. Why it's against your will that you should die. One hand is against your will you live, against your will you die. So what is your will? Once it comes into the body and it is exposed to the deeper profundity of the body, which it doesn't have access to on its own, then it doesn't want to leave the body and go back and ascend higher. Even though its own innate nature is to wish to ascend higher and to revert back to its source, but it's been exposed to something much greater than that. Because it wants to have exposure to this great gilui, which comes about because of the body. Which is a much more profound and supernal revelation of godliness than is available to the nefesh on its own. Ubifrat, that's just from being alive, just being a human being. Ubifrat, especially if this nefesh was taka effective and was able to be mavari the guf nefesh hamis, they should be devoted to Hashem. Then you have an even greater gilu of the nefesh. So of course of the guf. So the nefesh doesn't want to leave anymore. It's not interested. He wants to stay and revel in this. So misad echad, there's the Bal Koch Chatachai. His nature, without any exposure to the guf, it would have always wanted to ascend higher. But it's by dint of its relationship with the body, it has this now greater opportunity that it can have through having an encounter and an engagement with the body. So what we had here was just a few potential questions, critiques of the points, which the Rabbi Shabbos explained away effectively. And in the next paragraph, we're going to summarize what we've said till now and conclude the point of this maimah as it relates to Dibur specifically, and a little reference to Isha, and that will be the end of this maimah, which we'll learn Be'ezus Hashem next time.